Hey there, all you gurus. Thanks for joining in. I'm totally excited about this video. I had the opportunity of shooting with my coach, Dr. Preston. He is a phenomenal man and one of the world's leading experts on values. And values, your top value is actually your purpose, right? And you're going to see in this video Dr. Tom's passion for teaching people about their purpose. We're going to talk about linking your values. There's a whole host of ideas that we cover in here. It's a phenomenal talk. Tune in, enjoy. Hey, welcome everybody. I am really excited here. I've got a really dear friend of mine, Dr. Preston, who has been a really incredible mentor in my life and somebody who's just offered a ton of value around values, imagine that. And we were just kind of kicking things off and talking about how important values have been in my life and also in Tom's life. Tom, where are you live streaming from tonight?
Today I'm live streaming from the beautiful southwest part of Florida, a little place called Marco Island, where my wife and I have consciously chosen to spend the winter.
Beautiful. And I keep getting these wonderful Facebook messages from you of kayaking from these enchanted beaches and just loving your life. And the incredible thing, you're also at the same time managing a very productive and successful coaching career at the same time, which is pretty amazing.
Yes, it's definitely living my life conscious, my ideal, which I'm sensing we're going to segue into at some point, Norm, for sure.
Absolutely, and that was my next question. So I wanted to hear from you. How is it that, uncovering your own values, how is that, infiltrated into your life? What value has this been to you?
It's been literally, it's one of the most important days of my life, Norm, right? I would say that probably the most important day of my life is the day I met my wife. I would say 5 of the other most important days of my life was when my children were born. And I would say that, right up there in the top 10 was the day that I discovered my values, right? Mm-hmm. Because what it did, Norm, is it answered so many pondering questions. I've naturally been a curious little SOB almost my entire life, right? My mom always was like, I want you to have one just like you, kind of that energy, right? Because I wanted to know how stuff worked and I wanted to understand things in the universe and my role in it. And I was asking, kind of, by some people's standards, some crazy, questions when I was a pretty young guy, right? So wondering where I fit and wondering what my role is. And when I heard people talking about their purpose,
yes,
their why they were here on the planet, right? Well, I contend that our values takes that whole construct of why and our purpose and gives us a medium, an actionable platform upon which we can then actualize why the creative intelligence loved us, into existence, to be here, to perform our gifts, to the world, right? So 100% values has been an extremely important thing for me. And, if you just even look at my life, Norm, right? I mean, by today's standards, we've got 5 daughters. Like, by some people's standards, that's batshit crazy, right? But by my standards, or by my wife and I's standards, where family is literally one of our top, or actually our top value, it's like, that makes perfect sense. You can completely understand why we would have 5 children when family, fits that high. Discussions we've had and there's a lot of things, Norm, in my life, just to look at family as one aspect of this values piece for a second, right? There are exotic. My wife and I have traveled extensively. I don't want to sound like I'm crying the blues here at all, but there's a lot more exotic trips we could have taken. There's more exotic sports cars I could have driven in my life, but I chose to do things like have an education fund for my daughters so that they could have the opportunity to go and go to university for paid education, right? Mm-hmm. Those are behaviors that are direct flow downs from my values, right? And what I found, Norm, and this is the piece that I hope the audience gets, right, is that I'm excited about this day, Norm, right? But what I'm hoping they get is that when your goals and priorities, which regulate your behaviors and the habits that are formed in your life, when those flow down from a clear awareness of your values, life just takes on a whole other level of meaning. And a lot of the ought to, got to, should, have to nonsense that rambles around in at least in my brain at times, and many people's brains based upon 20 plus years as a coach consultant, that stuff just starts to leave, and you get that velocity vector about, making decisions like investing a decent amount of income to come here and spend the winter in South Florida, right? Completely in alignment with our values. And again, no surprise, Norm, guess who's coming to visit this winter? The kids.
The kids, of course, got it. Yes,
Of course they are, because that's a value, right? So anyways, I don't know if that exactly answered the question, but hopefully it provides a little context for our audience today.
Absolutely. I think we're getting to know you a little bit better. We're certainly getting to know your values. Now, for people who are just getting started in this, I want to hear a little bit more, like, where do values come from? I think this is an important thing to look at, is like, they are unique to each individual, right? But where are they sourced from?
It's a great question, Norman. I mean, we could spend the entire hour just talking about that, but to try and be as concise in Cole's notes or Cliff's notes as we could be, I want to create just a little bit of context for the audience in my worldview. And I don't want to dictate or project my values or worldview onto the audience, but hey, we're sharing, right? Yeah. So the context for me, Norm, is this. We are truly spiritual beings here having a human experience, right? Yeah. That's my worldview. Okay, so from that space then, one of the questions, philosophical questions that comes up for me, which brings us to the answer, or my answer to your question, Norm, is, why did the loving intelligence, the creative intelligence that I call God, why did God create humankind in the first place? What are we here? Why are we wearing these gorgeous earth suits, Norm, as spiritual beings? Why are we here having this experience? And the answer that makes the most sense to me, Norm, because it is an unanswerable question, but the one that makes the most sense to me is because we're here to experience life. We're here to express ourselves. We're here to understand the wholeness and the infiniteness that is the cosmos, that is the universe, that is God, right? So the answer to the question, where do values comes from, Norm, kind of comes from that context in my mind. Because it's commonly referred to in my world is that our voids come from our values come from our voids.
Right.
Okay? So watch, why would that be? Well, we're inherently looking to express ourselves and experience life. That's like that's a factory installed thing for being a spiritual being having a human experience. Okay? So as a result of that, we're looking for, our radar screen is looking for ways for us to become more whole, more complete, to understand the richness and diversity that is the universe. Yes. So what will drive us forward to explore and experience is a void, right? So as an example, Norm, right? It's not a direct value of mine. Money is not a direct value of mine, but it's linked to another very important core value of mine, which is family, right? And I wanted to provide that. Where did that come from? Myself, as a young child, I heard a lot of arguments in my family around money. We were I'm not crying the blues. It was a perfect experience for me to be where I am in life. But, my dad's 80 years old. He still has a mortgage on his home, for heaven's sakes, right? So it wasn't a big value for him on the financial front. And so, we were the lower middle class family that just kind of lived paycheck to paycheck. Mm-hmm. And the stress and anxiety that I felt as a child around that, I can literally remember, Norm, having an internal dialogue discussion with myself as a very young person saying, that's not going to be my life. Mm-hmm, right. Mm-hmm. So knowing that my parents couldn't necessarily provide that for me, I've been an entrepreneur since I was 6 years old, for God's sakes. I sold greeting cards door to door when I was 6. Wow. I had my first paper route when I was 9. I worked full time every summer from the time I was 12 years old on the local farms that we had in my area. Right. And again, that was a choice I made. But what drove the behavior, right, was a void around finance that I was filling. Now, again, it's not a direct value, and we're probably going to talk about linked values and so on, and I'm here in a second. But again, relative to using that as one example, so we'll commonly see people who had a void in their life of maybe had what some people would call a challenging or dysfunctional childhood. They value family, and they put a ton of time and energy into developing whatever version of family makes sense to them. So again, from the context of we're here to experience and express ourselves fully, our voids create our values and drives our behavior forward.
Right on. So our voids simply are whatever we feel we're missing, lacking, what we want more of, what we wish other people would offer to us, what we wish there is more in the world. If we could give anything to others, what that would be. I'm fascinated in life when I'm chatting with clients and we're looking at, like their parents. And so often people will get hung up on their parents. And when we begin to look at it, we see that, you know what, their parents were absolutely perfect for them in that they taught them a great lesson. And often it's in contrast that we learn more of what we might not want or what we do want more of. So there is perfection in the universe happening all of the time. And I'm going to say, especially in those times where we feel that there's something amiss or awry, that's just deepening, you know, our future value and what we want in the world, and priming us for our future selves.
I couldn't agree more, Norm, right? And you know, I think there's a tendency for people that are early on in this discovery, because, you know, you use that as a reference for this part of the discussion, but it's like people often, they want to almost blame somebody that they have a void in their life, or rather than appreciating that as a spiritual being, they were part of the co-creation of that experience. Yeah. For their value of their spiritual journey, for them to grow and evolve and experience and express themselves. And rather than throwing their parents under the bus, they should, in my opinion, they should be embracing them and celebrating it. And again, you know, I like your words probably better, contrast teaching. I used to call it reverse teaching, but right. You know, a lot of times we see things that happened in our life and say, we don't choose that. We choose the opposite of that, you know, because of this experience, yeah. Right? So I think there's tremendous wisdom in what you just shared, and it's been my experience as well.
Awesome. I often say contrast creates clarity, right? Yes. Through contrast, we get clear on things. Okay, so I'm curious because we've got a group of people in the other room, and they were talking about how, you know, they look through the DeMartini, who we want to do a shout out right now. Dr. John DeMartini, who is like, I don't know if he's the founder of this work, but he's really helped evolve this work. And certainly your understanding, you've been a primary teacher of mine, but he's a phenomenal man. If you want to go deeper with this work, give Tom a shout out. He'd love to work with you, or you can pick up one of Dr. DeMartini's books for sure. And the first time I worked through Dr. DeMartini's questionnaires, I remember it very well. I filled out all the questions, and then you asked me to put them in a hierarchy, what I felt was the top value, second, third, fourth. And I remember very well putting at the top what I thought should be, which was like spiritual growth, enlightenment, you know, personal growth, that sort of thing. And you looked through it and you responded back, number one, family. I was like, what? That's so boring. I don't want family to be my value, right? And you know, this goes in complements with what we were hearing in the other room, that, you know, a lot of people are kind of having a hard time to uncover their values. And I'm curious, in your perspective, why is it that, you know, we can go through life and not really get clear in this unless we like apply ourselves? Is that quite common? And what's your thoughts behind that?
Yeah, it is very common in my 20 plus years experience as a professional coach consultant, right? And it's wise if you have somebody that you've given the opportunity to know very well, to kind of, you know, be there and be your accountability partner as you work through these values. So that's an offering I would make for sure. But again, someone who knows you very well, like a truly BFF, and I would define that as someone who's willing to support you and challenge you, someone who's not just going to blow smoke up your rear end and, you know, and tell you, right? So I would say, relative to my perspective on answering that part of that question, well, like, why is it this way? Why? I think that, you know, we are constantly seeking the right people, places, ideas, and events in our lives for us to grow as spiritual beings, right? In terms of experiencing and expressing ourselves. So what that means to me, Norm, and, you know, and I'll give a shout out here to, you know, to the Abraham teachings, right? Mm-hmm. That we're on this full-time sort of like experiential trip where we're looking for, again, as I said, the right people, places, ideas, and events for us to grow. So we're gathering data all day, right? About what we might love, what we want to move away from, what our contrasts are, and so on. So, but almost because we haven't invested the time to do the introspection, to do the reflection, to really know ourselves well, we buy into somebody else's dreams, somebody else's values, someone else's priorities, right? And this causes, in my experience as a coach, causes a lot of angst for a lot of people, right? Because they subordinate their values to someone else's values, and then they start to resent it or resent the person. And I mean, this shows up in personal, intimate relationships a lot. It shows up in parenting relationships. It shows up in work relationships. I mean, it shows up in a lot of places. But I think the error in judgment, because I don't really see it as a mistake, but it's just people just not investing the time to reflect, to go inside, to really say, is that something that truly is something from within that inspires me, or is it like an ought to, got to, should have to kind of a thing from somebody else? Because you know what? Norm, using you as an example, I remember this conversation that you just referenced, right? It's like you are a growth-seeking being. You are a spiritual person. But I think it was using that context, you felt like that was more like what you should have down as your number one value rather than what was truly, in that place. Yeah. There's another distinction here, Norm, which I think we'll get to about what I called treasured values versus operating values. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if now is the right time or we'll put that off for a few minutes.
Sure. You know what? I want to touch on a couple of things first, and then we can go a little bit deeper.
Sure.
For sure. That's great. Okay. And so we touched on family values. And you know what? The number one thing that for people to become aware of where they are subordinating their values for something else is when you are shoulding on yourself, right? Yep. If you're saying should a whole bunch, I really should do this, I should do this, and you just never make time for it, that is a red alert that you are inserting somebody else's values and you're off track there. You had an interesting quote earlier, how you were talking about procrastination. Can you touch on that right now?
Yeah, for sure. I'm doing a talk in Toronto in a few weeks. Norman and I was, reflecting on what I might choose to speak about, and this came up in meditation this morning. But I think what I shared with you is that if you want to live, or one of the keys to live in a successful life and live in a successful business is to procrastinate. And again, and procrastination as a word gets thrown under the bus all over the place. People, I procrastinate, I suck, and people use it as a weapon to self-flagellate, and beat themselves up, right? Exactly. But I would offer this distinction in the language, Norm, right? Is that if you want to, one of the keys to a successful life and business is to procrastinate on anything that isn't connected to your values, right? Yeah. Because, what I find, Norm, when I go in and consult in business now a lot is, not a lot, pretty much every time, but there's always exceptions to rules, is, you go in and people are on the wrong seat in the bus called the business of their life, right? And they're not inspired by what they're doing. They're doing it because it's their job responsibility or something, but it doesn't connect to their values. It doesn't connect to what's important to them and their priorities. And they're never going to be as good at that as they would be as if they were truly doing something that's inspired, that's flowing from inside out, that supports their values, right? Mm-hmm. So, one of the things, just I keep coming back to this, Norm, because family is my number one value, but people say, like, my God, like, 5 kids, like, oh my God, like, and I meet their 1 or 2 kids and I go, damn, if I had kids like yours, I'd have 1 or 2 kids too, but again, here's the thing, Norm, like my wife and I have talked a lot about this as we get a chance to breathe and reflect after, our daughters being from 19 to 27 now. It's like, it was as natural for us to parent and to get up early in the morning and to do the late night things and do all of the stuff that we did. It was as natural for us to do that as it was to breathe, right? Mm-hmm. Because it was a natural expression of our values. Mm-hmm. And so, to the degree that people can connect to their values and express themselves from that place is where the joy, the fulfillment, but also, Norm, the prosperity comes from, and the abundance, because there's more flow to that. There's less energy to that. And it just becomes, I'll quote a study, Norm, and I'm paraphrasing this a bit. University of Chicago, many years ago, I was first exposed to this, I think, in the early 80s. So it might have been even a study from the 70s. But they took a business class and they looked at why they were there. And the 2 metrics they wanted to break down, Norm, is, are you there because you're inspired to do the work that you want to do as your career, or are you doing it for the money? Right. 90% of the class was there in that program for the money. 10% was there because they felt it was their muse. It was their, using our language, Norm, an expression of their values to do this work, right? They followed the Norm for 20 years. 20 years, okay? The results spoke for themselves. At the end of 20 years, and we're just looking at this, in this case, there was many metrics they used, but this one was prosperity. They looked at it financially. The 10% financially was outperforming the entire combined other 90% of the class after 20 years. Wow. So again, this is not just airy, foo-foo, cool, spiritual, rhetoric, Norm. This has practical life and business applications in my experience.
Yeah, for sure. And what I see is when we align with our values, we have more ease. There's more synchronicity. There's more real, like, kind of effortless growth that we're just, in this flow of life, and the universe is really lining up with us. Hey, I just wanted to stop and say there's people tuning in from all over the world. Thank you so much for joining our broadcast tonight. We're giving a shout out to Shelley, Lynn, and Sandra. And you guys are more than welcome to make questions today. If you have something you want to ask Tom, you go ahead and do that. And Tom, I wanted to touch on one thing. for me personally right now. And that was, I began doing values work with you about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was a big eye opener. And then I took a pause in working with you and was working with some other people. We always stayed in touch. We were buddies, of course. You're, a wonderful role model and mentor in my life. But then I invested in Full Circle coaching just a few months ago, and it was back to the drawing board. It's time to look at values again. And this is something you recommend for people to do every, I think, quarter you suggest, but regularly anyways, is to look at your values again. And what I realized in looking through my values this time was how different things were for me. And so what I saw was that a couple of things. So family was one of my top values. Service was really high up for me as well. And if you know me, I love serving people. It's like one of my passions in life for sure. And what happened for me was that for a number of years as a chiropractor, I was the selfless servant, meaning that I give to everybody else before I give to myself. And that ended up leaving me in a really tight place, energetically, health-wise, and financially. I went through some financial hardships as a result of that. And then through the process, as I reinvested in the work, finances shot up the list a whole bunch. And it was just fascinating for me and how much things can evolve over time. It certainly has for me. Is that something that you see for people, that their values kind of change around in a number of years, or how does that unfold?
Yes, I have seen that quite commonly in my own life and in many clients' lives, Norm, right? And it's again, it's part of a worldview or a context to this discussion, right? If we truly are spiritual beings, which part of that for me is imaging this energetic version of us, not just this physical flesh and blood, right? Well, that energy changes, it moves, it's part of the basic fabric of the universe. I mean, when Einstein said E equals mc squared back 100 plus years ago, he was suggesting that energy and matter were interchangeable the closer you get the speed of light. So the very context of this dialogue, I mean, is that it does change. And that's why the hierarchy of values, which you touched on briefly a bit ago, is so important in my mind, right? Because when you look at your hierarchy of values, you can then allow yourself to make decisions based upon, your hierarchy. So, and this does change. I have not as commonly found that the values change. Like you might have 4 values and then, 6 months later, those values don't even show up and you've got 4 brand new ones. I don't see that very often, but I do see that the hierarchy of those values and therefore the goals and priorities and behaviors that trickle down from that definitely do change. And again, I go back to the context, and I think the reason for that is because it's part of our factory installed nature to want to experience life and explore life and express ourselves, right? So as we go through this, there are different voids that may get filled up to a certain degree, and it's no longer a void. We may want to expand it, right? Because again, using me as an example, I didn't have a horrible childhood. I had a great childhood. I knew I was loved. I knew I was cared for. There was things that maybe I would have loved more, like having more financial abundance so we could travel a little bit. I mean, I didn't go on an airplane until I graduated from university, for God's sakes. Right? What I take back to the hierarchy, Norm, in my opinion, when you look at my behaviors, like, for example, even today, Norm, right, with all of the business calls and things that I have scheduled for today, I get a phone call from one of my daughters in the next 20 minutes. Much as I love and appreciate what we're doing, brother, I'm gone. I'm gone, because that's a hierarchy of my values. So let's go back and touch on that procrastination piece a bit, Norm, okay? Because again, people will procrastinate on things that they don't value. And so if you don't value family and children and so on like that, some small kid that needs a diaper changed, you're going to find other things to do in order to, to do that. One of the ones that I see a lot with my professional female entrepreneurs, Norm, right, is that stereotypically, and there's always exceptions, but the feminine really values connection and harmonized relationships. And so social media fits a great void for them, because they can, scroll Facebook or Instagram for half an hour and get, filled and connected to that. But in the meantime, they may not have done their share of the family finances or the budget, right? And so they're procrastinating on doing that. Why? Because they don't value it as much as this other thing. It doesn't make them bad people or wrong. It just makes, it's just an expression of their values. Having said that, Norm, right, I do think what we could be more aware of as a tribe of humans is that there are ways to link investing, say, a bit of time in your week or month to do, using my goofy example, the budget or some financial piece, right? Even if it's not strong on your values. And there, literally, Norm, we're talking about linking, building a neural network, a neural map in your head, axon dendrite neuron, right, to allow people to see the value of investing maybe a short period of time, but doing that so that they can buy the kids the new shoes they want, and they can afford to fix the brakes on the car to get them to school, and they can't, and so there is a linking piece there. I'll go back to money on this, Norm, right? One of my mentor, John DeMartini, on this, he said, Tom, if money's not one of your top core values, 4 core values, you'll never be rich. And I went, well, that sucks, because I saw myself as having financial wealth and abundance, and everything's relative, of course, but relative to, say, my parents, I certainly did. But when I confronted him on that, Norm, he just simply said, he said, well, Tom, you've just linked it to one of your other values. Which one did you link? And It was pretty transparent, Norm, that I'd linked it definitely to family. I definitely linked it to health, food choices we make and some of that stuff. So I know that kind of embellished the question you asked, Norm, but I wanted to build context for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a really important piece for me around linking, because one of the things that is not high on my list is health, which is surprising because I'm a health provider, right? But service, growth, spiritual practice certainly is more so. Family is way higher. And so for me, health is something, some people get out of bed in the morning and they're like, it's run day. I get to go for a run, right?
Yeah, for sure, Norm, right? Yeah, and that linking piece is an important piece, and it's actually a starting place for all of our new coaching clients at Full Circle Coaching Consulting is to have them do that linking piece, so that we don't have to push the mountain, the boulder up the hill all the time, relative to helping them fulfill on the goals and priorities that that they state, right? So that linking, and literally, Norm, I'm working on, and it's not rocket science, but I'm working on a mind map software platform, Norm, right now. I'm on my 7th iteration of it, so that, because it's got to be like really user friendly or people get freaked out by it. But literally, where people can go in, what I used to do by paper and build that neural network by paper and link on paper, to be able to do that on software now is a short upgrade, and something that we're definitely working on in our company.
Real good. Excellent. So any questions out there, now's your chance. If there's people in the Lifehouse community who want to come around and ask a question, you're more than welcome. And I wanted to go back to one thing you touched on earlier, and that was the treasured values and what was the other one?
Operational values.
Okay.
Yeah, so here's one that we see a lot, Norm, right? And whether it's law of attraction at work, but it's because family has been and continues to be my number 1 core value. I tend to attract a lot of clients in my coaching practice that have family as a high or their number 1 value, right? So again, that is, it is what it is, right? But I also have people, Norm, when I go back and do the analysis that you spoke of that I did for you many years ago, that when I go back through it, I go, you know what? I think they think think that they should have family's number 1 core value, but it's not. And so here's the distinction I'll make, Norm, okay? Family is still my number 1 core value, but if you looked at my behavior, if you looked at what I did every day, you'd go, wait a second, that ain't quite mapping out there, Dr. Tom, because you're not investing the time and energy. And, as you go through, and you referenced our good mentor and friend, Dr. John DeMartini, and his questionnaire, it looks at, some of the questions are, energy and time and so on, as you look at asking yourself the questions to get your values. So again, if you look at my behavior, I'm not doing that. But one of the reasons, Norm, is because my children are older. It takes a whole lot less energy to parent a 25-year-old than it does a 2-year-old. Mm-hmm. So if you look behaviorally, Norm, right, many years ago, there was an enormous amount of energy and time we were putting into that. So it was an operational value, right? So again, they're all values, but I would categorize them as a little bit of a subcontext categorization of treasured and operational. Because even though I'm not spending a lot of time and energy and money right now, Norm, on the family side of it, it's not in operation. I'm not working to fill the void as much, right? It's still treasured to me, because again, using my analogy just a little bit ago, Norm, right? One of my daughters calls me and she needs me right now. I'm gone, right? Mm-hmm. So again, because what I found it did, Norm, is it made some clarity for some of my clients in myself, that, just because you're not putting a lot of time and energy into the value, because the void's been filled for whatever reasons it was there for you, doesn't mean that it's not a treasured value of yours. Mm-hmm. And it really gave people the time to relax and to just, get more clear and concise from the inside out about what their values really were.
I got it. Thank you. I hadn't figured out that piece yet, but I just got it for sure. So the treasured value, yeah, we could fill that void. So it's not something we're working on so much, but it's very cherished to us.
Yes.
And if there was ever, where that got rocked or did become a void, somebody needed you, your family needed you, you'd be there in an instant. Wonderful. Okay, cool. Hey, Kate tuned in. Excellent. Hi, Kate. Welcome. Cool.
Hi, Kate.
That's great. Excellent. So I think we did really great for today. Oh, I did want to touch on one other thing, and this was a new exercise that Coach Fraser was doing with me last call, and that was about helping me clarify the hierarchy of my values. And what he was having me go through was, we were looking at things like family and service, and which one was higher on my hierarchy of values. And he asked me the question, okay, so if you could see your family for the rest of your life, but you couldn't serve another chiropractic client, which would you choose? Or if you could serve at a very high level, but you couldn't see your family for the rest of your life, which one would you choose, right? And so that's a really great question to have people to look at. If you could have one or the other, right, which one would you choose? And go down the list. That's been a really effective way for me to start to gain clarity of which one really is my top value in creating that hierarchy. Do you have any final comments, Tom?
I would just say this, Norm, right? That again, I'll go back to this being one of the most important days of my life when I distilled my values. And again, I do encourage people to look at it regularly. Quarterly, for a lot of people, seems like a little bit too much. So at least once or twice a year, go back in and just double check. And particularly if you're seeing yourself, starting to procrastinate on something that you used to, value a lot and do more spontaneously or more directly, because likely it means that there's been a hierarchy of value shifts. And again, rather than using it as an excuse to beat yourself up, you use it for a moment of clarity, right? So then you can just own that piece, right? And then from there, you can move on to make, other and/or if more direct, more concise, more fulfilling, commitments to yourself and your family and your business.
Beautiful. Well, I want to finish with this. I just thank you so much, Tom, for everything you've offered to me in my life. And number one, I want to thank you for modeling what you teach. It is so clear with your Facebook posts and whatnot. It's like, this man is aligned. He's living according to his ideals. And this is what he teaches his clients, which is way cool to learn. We're not just learning some exercise for the sake of doing an exercise. We're seeing it in practical realization for you, which is really, really inspiring for me. And it's one of the things that has kept me continuing and being in contact with you throughout the years. And I look forward to an ongoing relationship with you for years and years to come and continuing to glean your wisdom. So, and I think I'm speaking for a lot of people too who are part of the Full Circle tribe, and even the chiropractic community and all the clients around the world. So, hey, for everybody who tuned into today's video, if you found value in this, which we've been talking about values all day long, I hope you did, right? If you found value in this, please hit share. You can post this on your wall. You can share it with your friend. And, at the end of the day, I really believe that this is one of the most important, if not the most important things we can do for ourselves and also the world. Because when we're clear in our values, it's like we know ourselves, right? That old saying, know thyself first, right? So this is a really, really important exercise. And you can pass it on so simply through the Facebook world by just hitting post. So you can do that today. All right. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in today. Tom, enjoy Florida. Enjoy your family. And thanks for being in my life, buddy.
Thank you, Norm, for your kind words and for creating this platform. It's an important platform to get some really important information out to the world. Thank you for your gifts.
You're so welcome, man. Okay, have a great day.
See you, sir.